It doesn't take much effort to notice that cartoons used to be a lot more bizarre. For someone who watched Courage the Cowardly Dog or The Marvelous Misadventures of Flapjack, for example, looking at Cartoon Network today feels at least a bit suspicious, you know? I don't know how to explain it properly, but I feel like it has lost its essence. Its bizarreness or randomness were incredibly important elements for Cartoon Network because they were present in most of its shows. I think that's what made it a favorite for many people, even for a more mature audience in general. And speaking of bizarreness, my friend, do you remember the episode with the deer from Adventure Time? At least for me, it looks like a deer, but the characters call it a moose, so I'll call it a moose too. This episode caught me by surprise the first time I saw it. I still remember it perfectly to this day, and it probably occupies a little corner in my brain labeled traumas. So come with me in this atmosphere of horror, suspense, and bizarreness, and let's revisit the episode of the bizarre deer, or moose. The moose wreaks havoc inside the Candy Kingdom, and even though the situation is pretty crazy, we have that feeling of, come on, it's Finn and Jake. They've already faced a lich, you know? They'll crush this thing. It seemed like they could handle the situation. But then, the moose goes wild. He makes Jake hit his head and literally breaks both of Finn's legs in 2 different places. These scenes are just violently bizarre on a level that no one was expecting. It was like I had accidentally switched to an episode of The Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, you know? And look at Finn's face when his legs are broken. Then the moose throws Finn against the wall as if he were a rag doll. Finn then wakes up with both legs broken, which isn't surprising at all. The surprise is that he received medical treatment, so things were probably resolved, right? After all, it was just a moose. But the atmosphere starts to get a bit strange and uncomfortable when Finn doesn't find anyone in the hospital. No one on the street, no one anywhere. And that's the point where we, the viewers, start feeling more disturbed and anxious watching this episode. The feeling of strangeness and confusion comes from seeing such a joyful, noisy, and bustling place suddenly dead silent. We then get a false sense of hope when Finn finds Jake. Not everyone had disappeared, and now we were finally going to find out what happened. At this moment, the episode lives up to its name. No one can hear you. Finn is alone, and no one is going to help him. After just 30 seconds of conversation between the two, it becomes clear that Jake has lost his mind. He's completely out of it. His head is bandaged, and he keeps talking about a surprise party that obviously only exists in his messed up head. But since Finn is a bit naive, he believes in Jake's insane rambling. The scene where Finn is taking a bath manages to be extremely disturbing. The feeling that there's no one out there, but at the same time, that someone is watching you is truly terrifying. The episode knows this and plays with it. Then, the moose makes a brief appearance, and if everything else hadn't already indicated that something was wrong, this was the final proof. Why would the moose still be in the Candy Kingdom if everything had been resolved? Finn finally starts to doubt what his friend is telling him, but when he expresses this, Jake becomes completely crazed and aggressive. Jake doesn't want Finn to search for anyone under any circumstances because it would ruin the surprise. This party is probably something Jake's mind came up with to comfort himself about everyone's disappearance. In his head, they would all reappear when it was time for the party, and if Finn messed that up, maybe they wouldn't show up at all. Then Finn hears some really scary noises coming from the sewer, which sound like they're from the Candy People, making the mystery and tension skyrocket. When Finn tries to tell Jake about this, he finds out that he's been asleep for 6 months. So we start to wonder, did Jake spend 6 months living in that situation? Or worse, were the Candy People down there suffering for 6 months? We can't know for sure, but it's deeply unsettling to think about. Finn, being clever, manages to trick Jake into letting him into the sewer. And that's when we hit the peak of horror, my friends. He finds the Candy People in complete agony, trapped in some kind of resin that seems to be draining their energy, leaving them weak, or something like that. Finn thinks Jake is the one who did this, so he punches him right in the face. This punch snaps Jake out of his craziness, bringing him back to his senses. However, the moment is interrupted when Peppermint Butler tells Finn that it wasn't Jake who did all of this, it was the moose. Suddenly, the moose appears, stands up, and removes his hoof-shaped gloves, revealing that he has hands. If what I mentioned earlier was the peak of horror, this is definitely the peak of bizarreness in the episode. The fact that the moose had hands for some reason really terrified me when I was a kid. I don't even know exactly why, but it just did. This scene is undoubtedly one of the most disturbing in the entire show. But anyway, Finn ends the madness by hitting the moose in the head with 2 bricks and pushing him into the water, ensuring that he would never bother anyone again and that things would finally return to normal.